Welcome to the Humanity Leadership Podcast, where we tackle your toughest leadership challenges and share practical tools to help you lead with impact. Well, welcome to this episode of the Humanity Leadership Podcast. My name's David Wheatley. I'll be your host today, and I'm joined by the good doctors, Judy Brown and Rick Eigenbrod, who we have these regular conversations about all things leadership that go a little bit longer than our normal episodes. And this time, we want to talk about what's the letter that only you can write. So just leave that hanging for a minute just to see. I wonder what people are thinking about. But Judy, tell us what this is all about.
Well, what prompted this in my mind is that for years in the work that I've done in leadership development, one of the readings that I've offered people is Martin Luther King's letter from a Birmingham jail, which he wrote in 1963 when he'd been thrown in the Birmingham jail for his leadership work in the nonviolent civil rights movement. The letter is very long. It's like 16 pages or whatever, but it has in it some extraordinary language. And it also is a letter written to call forth people from all different backgrounds. And so it's a letter that creates what I'm going to call a very large tent. It's meant to draw a lot of people in, even though civil rights at that point was a fraught endeavor. So that's long interested me. He was in jail. He didn't know how long he'd be there. It might have been forever. He might have died in jail. But it turned out it was only 3 days. In 3 days, they got him out. But in the period in which he was in there, he had nothing to do, he said, but think. And so he decided to write a letter that explained why he was in support of civil rights. He had no paper. He had the edges of the New York Times, the margins of the New York Times, toilet paper, sandwich bags, and that's it. And his lawyer, who kept coming in to visit him and so forth, as King would write bits of this letter on various of this stuff, would stuff it under his jacket and sneak it out of the jail. And so there's another part of this that I just found out a couple of years ago, and this is the part that really delights me even more. There was a young college student. She was about 20. She'd never had a job before, and somebody told her to go apply for a job at this organization that she had never heard of. And her name was Willie Pearl Mackey King, no relationship at all to King. So she is at the receptionist desk at the Southern Christian Leadership Conference, and she doesn't even know what the organization is. She picks up a brochure that's there because she's at the reception desk. She has to figure something out and looks at it and realizes that the man who's walking in front and who is asking her questions about herself is Martin Luther King Jr., who leads the organization. She's really trying to figure all this out on the fly. He invites her to Birmingham for the march. And when his lawyer starts bringing out the pieces from his shirt of the letter that King had written, it is she who is on her hands and knees piecing it together. And she said, and it was a mess, is what she said. She now lives 30 miles from me here in the Washington, D.C. area. She's a nice grandmotherly type. But she said first of all, she said King's handwriting was really bad. And then she said, and there was lousy light in the jail, so he couldn't see what he was doing. And so she found herself on her hands and knees piecing together what has turned out to be a classic leadership piece and a classic in the civil rights movement that we now see as, I'm going to say, a finished product. It all hangs together, but it hangs together because this young woman on her hands and knees put it together, glued it together, taped it together. Um, and that sort of fascinates me because it's one thing to have written a letter from the power of your own understanding and your own values, but it's another thing for to realize that other people may have to put it together.
Right.
Some of us may be in the position at times of writing the letter, that is having something to say that is so important and so central to us that we write the letter. But I think there are other times when we find ourselves on our hands and knees, piecing together bits of perspective and information that we've been handed in tatters. And that really interests me. The first writing the letter, whether it's a letter or some other form of expressing what we want to share with the world that only we can share. I mean,
Mhm.
only King could have written that letter. Somebody else couldn't. So it raises the question of what might we offer that only we can share? And then the question becomes, when will we be called to make something out of something that has just been handed to us in pieces? And the third part of the story, in a way, is that after she put it all together, the Quakers got a hold of it and distributed 75,000 copies of it. And that's how King's letter got out in the world. So, sort of thinking about the various steps in getting an important message out, there's there's a Kalamazoo-based synchronicity for me in this that I'll share, which is there is a well-known writer and poet by the name of Mark Nepo who lives in Kalamazoo. And probably 20 or 25 years ago, Mark and I were in a project together in Kalamazoo, which is where David is. I assume everybody on this call knows that, but just in case. And Mark took me aside and said, uh, I think you should write the book that only you can write. He said, and I said, I don't want you to think about who the audience is. I just want you to think about what you have to say to the world. And I remember thinking, what an odd bit of advice to give me. I mean, always the question is, who's the audience? He said, don't think about the audience. Think about what it is that you alone can say. And it was actually that prompted uh, my book, The Art and Spirit of Leadership. So that's the set of themes that are sort of circling around in my head. Um, I think there's another thread of this. Um, David and Rick, if you can stand I'm going to call it a related story um, because it has to do with our willingness to take the step that only we can take. Sometime 30 years ago or so, an American was being held prisoner in Jerusalem. And Jesse Jackson, who was famous as a civil rights leader, for some reason was outraged by this idea. And he came out of his Chicago office and walked to the curb and hailed a cab and said to the cab driver, take me to Jerusalem. And the cab driver, as you can imagine in Chicago, said, but I can get you as far as O'Hare. And so at O'Hare, Jackson got out of the cab and said to the luggage guy, I want to go to Jerusalem. And the guy said, I suggest you go up to Tel Aviv Airlines. So he hot-footed it up to Tel Aviv Airlines and said, I want to go to Jerusalem. They said, we can get you as far as Tel Aviv. He got on the plane, went to Tel Aviv. When he got off, he said to whoever was the cab driver there, uh, I want to go to Jerusalem. And so, bit by bit, after insisting time after time, take me to Jerusalem, he found himself in Jerusalem saying, take me to the prison where they're holding the American. So the cabbie took him there. At the gate, he said to the person at the gate, um, take me to the cell where the American is being held prisoner. And so they opened the gate and let him in. He got to the cell itself, and he said to the man who was guarding the cell, open the door. And he did. Uh, and he walked into the cell and said to the American, come with me, we're going home. And he turned around and came back. And that story has so stuck with me, what it means to be committed to an action, in a sense, without knowing how you're going to do it,
Mhm.
but just having that incredible clarity of message that it was not okay that the American was being held captive in Jerusalem. And he, Jesse Jackson, who had, I'm going to say, no job, no assignment to do that, simply took the assignment. So anyway, that's the set of ideas that have been wandering around in my mind, which leaves me wanting to ask other people, what is it that you have to offer that only you can offer? And if it's not as a letter, what form will it be in? How will you offer it? How will you communicate it? Um, and I suppose this question of, and what stops you from doing it right now? So anyway, that's it. That's all I have to say to start with.
And there's a theme that runs through all of those, isn't there? All those stories, whether it be Jesse Jackson or Mark Nepo talking to you, or whether it be the Martin Luther King, either side of that story, the writing the letter or the piecing it together. And you said it in one of the last sentences there, the commitment to something bigger and
Yes,
that willingness to actually sit down and do something bigger from the place that you are now. And maybe right now in time here in April 2025, that's a great call out to something bigger, isn't it? That
yes.
whatever that looks like. And so this whole idea, I'm hearing a little bit of a call to action for any leader that's listening is what are you going to do that steps up your commitment to something bigger?
I, that's a wonderful the framing of it, a wonderful framing of it. Um, Often in the work that I do, my mother gets quoted by my colleague who has never met my mother. My mother, a Michigander, and Wendy will often say, as Judy's mother would say, "This will not do." Um, and there's something in that notion of finding yourself that clear that something will not do. And David, as you said, and clear about your commitment to do something about it. And I want to add, when you when you don't have a step-by-step path, and when you aren't sure that it will make a difference, I mean, because that's certainly got to be true. King would have no way of knowing that what a huge difference that letter would make. Just
They didn't
none.
even know whether it was ever going to get out and get pieced together.
That's
And
exactly
so it
right.
was, but the persistence
Yes,
to keep,
persistence
uh,
and insistence.
yeah.
Um,
And it's interesting because we have a tool, I've shared it on here before, the four choices of leadership, which one of the continuums is commitment. And we used to have a low level of commitment or high level of commitment. And then a couple of years ago, we changed it to commitment to comfort on one end and commitment to impact on the other end. And as you
Wow.
were talking, I was just thinking that that commitment is actually a call to action to what's the bigger impact that you as a leader can have and you as the only person that can do this, that can step out there and make this happen. So that
Well,
resonates strongly.
and Rick often says that comfort is overrated and discomfort is what kicks us into gear and will usually kick us into a developmental gear of something not only for the larger good, but for our own growth and stretch. Um, and so that means being willing to feel the discomfort and to be moved by it in some way. be moved by the discomfort.
Well, that discomfort creates a certain energy as well that puts you in a different place, doesn't it?
Yes.
That
Yeah.
that's fine. So, Rick, you've been quiet so far.
Well, riveted, I would say. I was thinking as we were talking, you've invited Judy and I on a number of occasions, and we've had great fun, and we appreciate it. And but that a lot of when we're guests, what Judy and I are offering is not sort of mainline leadership toolkit, how to do it, kind of stuff. It's really, one might think that some of the topics we've had, murmuration, telling the team when you first meet them, you're a human being. I look back on, and today's topic, you know, it's not leadership toolkit stuff. It's not financial acumen. It's not business acumen, etc. It really is about leadership. And I'm reminded over and over about how true it is that we manage, by what we do and say and direct. We lead by who we are. And a lot of what I think we've been offering, including today, puts the focus on who are you? And that people are going to follow you. And leaders who think about things like murmuration or think about things like we're talking today are the people that we're more likely to follow. There's something compelling about them. And it has to do with who they are as human beings. And I was just looking at what I wrote down, one of the things we said here. And I had a goofy thought that if I was on a board of directors hiring a CEO and I was on a selection committee, I would ask this question: what do you have to say to the world?
Wow.
Because everything else we need to know about, much of what we need to know about you, is already documented. Right? And we're generally asking, what do you do, about what as a kind of mechanic, if you will. We ask them things about themselves as mechanic. We never ask them themselves, we hardly ever ask them things about themselves as artists. And, the more we get into this business of leadership development, the more and I think the three of us realize that it is an art.
Mm-hmm.
Get the science down, get the toolkit down, get good at the tools. Now develop all the other pieces that make you an artist, a full-rounded human being, and that will make you more and more compelling to the people who have to say, I would follow her.
Mm-hmm. Wow.
Which would be interesting if you ask that question in an interview, apart from the long pause. I wonder whether people have thought about that, and that's part of our challenge today, isn't it? That to get people to think about it is, what do you have to say to the world?
Yeah, I think David I'm just tickled as I listened to us today. And what you just said gave me some words. I think in our conversations, we're asking people to think about what they don't think about.
Yeah.
And I want a leader who's committed to thinking about what they don't think about.
Right.
Which means they have to have awareness, curiosity, inquisitiveness, commitment to learning and development. Not the same thing. Oh, we did a whole thing on the difference between learning and development. I want every leader that I want to follow to understand the difference between learning and development and be committed to both. But what's going to make me more inclined to follow him or her is a sense that they know the difference. And it's those components of leadership that I think we have been talking a lot about And I'm just delighted that we do, 7 Habits of Highly Effective. Good stuff, good stuff, toolkit stuff. I'm not demeaning it in any way.
And we talked a number of episodes ago about space and the value of space and leaving the spaces, which is kind of links into what we're talking about here, isn't it? That if we're challenging people to think about what they don't think about, that's also challenging them to create the space to not do that. And in a time when I just got off a coaching conversation that was half of it was, well, I've got too many things going on. I don't have time to do this. And I did a whole bunch of work for a meeting and then nobody showed up to the meeting because everybody else is busy. And so we're in this turmoil of
Yeah.
busyness that someone once told me our coaching sessions to them were an oasis of sanity in a desert of craziness.
Right.
Oh, it's lovely.
It
And
is.
and it's so, and I've said to people before, if all I do for 90 minutes a month is create space so you can think about some different things, then that's been value.
Yeah.
Because the rest of your time is crazy busy, then
Space and grace. I had this crazy sense, a crazy idea. It's like in my company. I mean, one of the things I do with it in the talks I give, and sometimes I'll use this to get people thinking. I'll say, well, in my company, and then of course they want to argue with you, and which is what you want, right? So here you go. In my company, after you've been there 8 years and you climb the ladder, you must take a 2 year sabbatical and go back and take 2 years worth of liberal arts courses.
Whoa.
Because if you look back historically on universities and what they did and what they offered, it's so different from what's evolving now. And, I think all three of us have kind of extensive university background experiences. I watch now with the tiger moms and dads and all the statistics, and people more and more want a university education to be a university, to be a trade school. And so it's like, what universities produce students who get the highest income over time? How many Fortune 500 CEOs come from your it's a trade school mentality. It's instrumental. And historically, that's not what universities were about. I remember when Megan went off, my daughter went off to Rollins College, which is a liberal arts college in Winter Park, Florida. And she said, Dad, what's a liberal arts college? Why did I go there? And I remember saying spontaneously, I'm so proud of myself that I had an answer. I said, a liberal arts college helps you understand the world you live in, yourself, and the world you live in.
You
And
know,
no,
she never forgot that.
the
we're not talking about everybody has to go to college, but what you're talking about there is that do something that opens up your thinking
yes.
Yes,
so that then you're in a position to be able to say, what do I have to say to the world? Or
Yes.
exactly.
what's the letter that only I can write?
And I think the more we are exposed to that, the clearer we get about what it is we want to say, because it's coming from the inside out. We're not regurgitating to get an A on the curve, right? And where does that come from inside of us, where we know we have something to say and we know what that is? Think of how simple and complex that is.
Well, and I would say that one of the joys of being in these kinds of conversations, the three of us, is that we're we're sorting that out in public and we're sorting it out with each other. We're answering those kinds of questions for ourselves, which led me as an artist to grab my, with apologies, guys, my latest poetry book, which is called These Days, because about, I don't know, 10 minutes ago in our conversation, I realized that when the question is, what do I have to say to the world? What I have to say then, like what King had to say, is timeless. So, very short poem called Timeless that I think is what we're touching on here. What we are learning together is that what we have is timeless. Could we have figured that out alone, each on our own? I don't know. I'll never know.
That's fabulous, Judy. That is fabulous.
It's both being clear with ourselves, but also having the space and time to meander through conversations with each other, in which we're sort of tugging at the threads of what do I have to say to the world?
Judy, I remember in retrospect, people asked me, about writing my book. You wrote 7, I wrote 1 thin volume. And I was very clear that when I started it out, I had no sense of I want to publish this work. I really was clear that I was writing this book so I could know what I think.
Right.
And as I wrote into what I thought, into a lot of things I hadn't thought about and needed to think about. And so by writing, there certainly were points where I was saying, okay, how's this going to land? And there's, a lot of this is banal and hackneyed. And yeah, it's not like I was not conscious. But the more I would write to know what I think, the more would come and the richer it would come.
Mm-hmm.
And in a sense, we talk about what's the letter you can only write, in some way we're going back to what is it that you and only you can say.
Right. Or you and only you can offer in whatever modality it might be.
Uh-huh.
Yeah. Interesting. You bring that book writing piece up there because our tools tend to evolve through our coaching. And then one day we sit down and say, oh, we should turn this into a book. And then you create the space to write it. And then in creating that space to write it, you realize that some of the things that you're thinking about need to be tweaked and different and adjusted. And it's like, oh, now I come to think about that. There's something deeper here. And that's actually the wrong language and the wrong way to say it. And it's because I created that space to think of something that was otherwise just evolving organically.
Mm-hmm. That personal practice, I mean, that what we're talking about, how we were encouraged to write, how we've learned the best way to write, is not for an audience. It's an audience of one. We write to know what we think, which means we have to think about how we think. If you look in the world today at leaders and you put that lens, which ones seem to you to think of, or leaders who think about what they think, and which ones don't?
Right.
And if I was in any organization, I would want to have some sense about to what degree this person thinks about what they think, because it requires self-awareness, it requires curiosity, it requires all kinds of stuff. And so this notion about thinking about what you think, certainly Martin Luther King had to think about what he thought,
right,
to put that down, because he could have put down Bible quotes ad infinitum, for example. And what he put down was him.
Yeah.
So then comes to the practice of journaling and things like that creating the space to just write stuff down and then see what happens with your thoughts and finding that time to sit and write and to scribble and just because it's even that process of going from your head to your pen that slows you down and you're thinking about the next sentence as you're writing down the last one and it becomes this process. But and I like the challenge because I think anybody that's listening, any leader that isn't thinking that way, isn't doing all of these things, isn't creating the space to think, who isn't making themselves a little bit uncomfortable, who isn't thinking, who isn't committing to something bigger, who isn't wondering what they have to say to the world, who isn't thinking about what they are thinking or what they're not thinking about, that they're missing an opportunity.
And one of our sessions, we talked about such things, but I remember we talked about high value contribution, defined as what is it that you and only you can do. And I think, again, if I'm on the board, what I know they and only they can do is what you just said, David. And they better do it. Otherwise, I'm paying you too much. And I think in these things, I probably play on words a lot. So as I looked up the word letter, and just, which I've done with other things, right? Like success. Oh, it means that which is to follow in Latin historically, not I did it. And it came up with these two words. It is first off, letter means two things, right? It means, first of all, we think about a piece of some sort of missive, right? Some sort of, and we usually think concretely into it's a piece of paper with words written on it. Yeah. And that's a letter. But a letter is also, quote unquote, a written character, A, B, C, D, E, F, G.
Huh.
Think of the play on words of that. We're talking about the letter only you can write. The letter only you can write is your written character. Martin Luther King wrote his character.
That's right.
And so when we say, what is it that you have to say to the world comes out of your character. And the other thought I had is we are always writing a letter that is not a written character, but a communication of character in everything we do. And it's the letter only we can write, because only we is us.
Mm-hmm.
What a great note to wrap up on that, I think, of our conversation, because it's a challenge then, and I'm going to put the challenge out to anybody that's listening to do exactly that. Write your letter, capture your character, and we'd love to hear from you. Maybe that's an opportunity for us for me and them to have a conversation on the podcast, because I would hope that if they're doing that, if they're writing their letter, if they're capturing their character, then that's going to be an exploration of who they are. It's going to be the letter that only they can write, and it's going to be insightful for other leaders. So, Rick, Judy, thanks again for another great topic that we've touched on, scratched at a little bit. Make sure you're finding space. Make sure you're being uncomfortable. Make sure you're thinking about both the things you're not thinking about and the things you are thinking about. Commit to something bigger. Write your letter and capture your character. Thanks for joining us.
Pleasure, Dave.
What a pleasure.
That was the Humanity Leadership Podcast. Make sure you like and subscribe and visit humanity.com for many more resources.